And hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the television show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm Eliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. We are delighted to have local historian Dale Queen with us here today to talk to us about his latest book, Cliffeside Park, Gem of Nature. And Dale Queen is a lifelong resident of Ashland, Kentucky, in addition to being a local historian. He graduated from Paul Blazer High School. He enjoys playing the drums and has played drums in various rock, country, gospel, and jazz bands. He also enjoys exercising and studying early American history, biblical studies, as well as communication studies. Mr. Queen has received undergraduate degrees in humanities and applied process technologies from Ashland Community and Technical College, a Bachelor of Business Administration degree from Marshall University, and graduate degrees in communication studies from Marshall and Liberty Universities, and adult and higher education from Morehead State University. He works as an adjunct instructor of communications at Ashland Community and Technical College in Ashland, Kentucky. And we're delighted to have him here with us today to talk about this great book. And Dale, welcome to Chapters. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Eliot. Thank you for inviting me.
Let's talk about the cover first, because one of the things I wanted to ask you about was that sort of subtitle or that tagline, Gem of Nature. Where did that come from? How does that fit into the book in terms of describing Cliffeside Park?
You know, whenever I was doing some research for the book, there wasn't a whole lot of information out there to begin with. As far as I can tell, there were about 3 to 4 paragraphs ever written about Cliffeside Park. And doing the research, I ended up finding this one little gem of a reporting that was a lady that it was a first-hand account. We don't know the date. It just so happened it was in a newspaper article, and the very top of the newspaper article was cut out. So we don't know the date or the year or anything, but she gave a really good description, probably the best description that anybody's ever seen so far of Cliffeside Park. And she called it a gem of nature. And that was how she concluded her little story. So after doing some research, I thought, well, that was the conclusion of her story. I thought that should be the beginning of this story.
Very good. The name itself, Cliffeside, really has an interesting origin, and you write about this in the book that around 1900, there was a pond in Ashland called Savage Pond, and that pond ended up being transformed. There were some contract negotiations that had to take place. A contract had to be signed. Tell us a little bit about this Savage Pond and who was involved in these contract negotiations in terms of getting it sort of transformed from Savage Pond into Cliffeside Park.
Okay. One of the reasons I really got into the research for Cliffeside Park, I grew up about a mile away from where it was located, and I used to play in a small creek growing up, and the small creek flowed into a larger creek, and that larger creek eventually flowed into what was called Savage Pond. My mother used to tell me stories of that there was a fascinating park at the end of that creek, and she was our family historian. She knew all the details of Cliffeside Park, and she died in 2010, and I didn't ask her any questions. So after we started doing the research, I started looking at that area. And Savage, there's a neat little story behind Sam Savage. He was related to really the first family of Ashland, the Pogues, which it used to be called Pogues Landing. And he had an ice house. And what he would do is he would dam up the creek, and it wasn't really a big lake, it was just a small pond. And in the wintertime, they would cut ice, and they put it in a large ice house. It had about 12 inches of sawdust and insulation. Well, after a while, during the summer months, people started going around where that pond was located, and they would have picnics. It just became a little gathering place, and there was a large field, because you have to imagine that Highway 23 wasn't there at that time, so it was a large field. They'd have picnics, and he wanted to be friendly with the area, so he had some picnic benches set up. After a while, there came a group that worked with transportation, and the whole thing about Cliffeside Park is Cliffeside Park was a trolley park. And a lot of people aren't familiar with that term. And what a trolley park was it was a way for electric companies. This is right after electricity had hit not only the Ashland-Huntington area, but all around the United States. The electric companies, they wanted to give their riders a place to go to, a destination. So if you can imagine the old trolley tracks, they weren't like the train tracks we have now where you have 5 or 6 train tracks. They can go in different directions. The trolley tracks, most of them, there's only one track. So a car would go to a certain destination, stop, go back, and then another car would come and pick them up. So the electric companies decided that we need to give these people something to do while they're waiting for the other trolley to come by. And as they were waiting, they said that if not, they're not going to use our electric trolleys, they're going to use another form of transportation. So this particular area that you're talking about, Savage Pond, they thought this is at the edge of Ashland, right where Catlettsburg begins. There's already a little group, a little meeting place that would give them a nice little pond to look over. There's already picnic benches. So that area was chosen. And that area was eventually leased from the Gartrell family at the time. And that's why there's been some confusion. Was it started in 1890 or was it 1900? So that was leased starting in 1890. But the key 1900, that is when the transportation company eventually took over.
Okay, very good. So you're looking at right around really the turn of the century, basically, by the time everything gets sort of up and running and ready to go. How did you get interested in Cliffeside Park? Was it because your mother was a historian, or where did your interest in really wanting to research this type of a project come from?
Just being raised about a mile from there, every time I can remember when I was a little kid, we would drive to Camden Park, and it seemed like every single time we'd drive by that area, my mom would always tell me, she'd say, I know you're going to ride the roller coaster when you get to Camden Park, but did you know there was a roller coaster here? And she would still try to tell me stories I wish I could remember, but of course as a child your focus is on Camden Park,
Sure.
Your destination. And I really got interested in this for our Kiwanis Club. I was giving a presentation one time. We usually have a speaker to come every single week. I was the president of the Kiwanis Club, a local civic group, and our speaker didn't show up. So I just happened to have a flash drive that had about 5 or 6 pictures, of the park. And 15, 20 minutes, I put together the 3 or 4 paragraphs that was known, and gave the presentation, showed them some pictures. And at the end of that presentation, we had 15, 20 people just asking you questions. They said, "This is really interesting." I didn't have the answers. Nobody at the time had any answers. And one of the people that was in our group, he's also the mayor of Ashland, and he said, "Would you be interested in giving this same presentation to a group of Ashland boosters?" He said, they're business people and they would be interested in this. So I thought, I'm going to have more than 4 pictures or 5 pictures. So I went to the library, looked up some more pictures, tried to find some things. They had a couple little articles that didn't really mean much. And I gave that presentation. At the end of that presentation, some of the questions that they asked, I just started writing them down. I said, I don't have the answer, but I'll try to, because one of the questions they asked was, why did they call it Cliffeside Park? And I always thought, well, I guess there was cliffs there, I don't know. So I was writing all the answers down, and after I left that place, I guess about 4 or 5 weeks, I started doing some research and found a few of the answers. And the more research that I completed, I thought for the next program, at least I can have 20 minutes worth. Well, the next program didn't come about, so I started doing some more research, and one of the librarians down at the Ashland Library said, we have, and I don't spend a lot of time down there. He said, we have one person per week coming in asking about this place. He said, could you write something down? And my first thought was, okay, I'll write a couple papers and you can put it in a file. And he said, really, we'd like to have this in a book form. He said, I think this needs to be left for the next generations. So that was my goal from that point on was, can I get enough information? So I had a few goals. I wanted to find out, why did the park start? What was it like during its life? And why did it close? Why isn't it there now? And that started the research, and of course, why did the park start was about the trolley parks. Never heard of a trolley park until that time. And then we really started looking at the pictures, and my wife and I spent about every evening, about a year and a half, almost every evening. We even came up here to the Cattle Library, and we'd bring some granola bars and kind of stash them and just eat lunch while we were there. And looking through the pictures, there's about 120 pictures in the book, and then we started answering a lot of those questions.
I wanted to ask you one question that you touched on just a moment ago, which is what happens, during the park's livelihood. When it opens, you talk about how it covers 50 acres, but really one feature you talk about that I found so interesting was how the guests were treated. And we think of amusement parks today as just sort of this solitary or group activity. You buy your ticket, you go in, you kind of go where you want to go and do what you want to do. But Cliffeside Park was a little different, because you talk about this in your book, that that was the place to be and to be seen. So what made it so special for guests? Why was it such a destination place for people? Why did you want to go there to be and to be seen?
And that particular quote came from a newspaper article that one of the writers had written of the day, especially with the place to be seen. And you can see this in a lot of the pictures at the time. People really dressed up. Wasn't like today, they weared shorts and ball shirts or whatever. People really dressed up, and that gave them a destination. At this particular time, the places in Ashland was Central Park and Cliffeside Park, and all of Huntington used to come down to Cliffeside Park. But Huntington played a huge part of this, and people wanted to go out to show off their dresses and their outfits, and you really made a good point about how the patrons were treated, because there were so many different places for them to go, but it wasn't as large as a Kings Island or a Disney World. With Cliffeside Park, what I always try to imagine is whenever you get off the trolley car, and the first thing you would hear is some of the orchestras that were playing, and they'd have 2 or 3 orchestras at different bandstands. And I also picture the person getting off the trolley car. They're going to hear the carousel, the music from the carousel, and the splashing of the boats that they had. In the heyday, they had 25 small canoes that were located there. So it was still a small community. It was something new for the patrons.
One of the things also that happens, in addition to the normal events of the park that you talk about in the book and write about in the book, was a series of special events called the Chautauqua, if I can get that out correctly. What was that Chautauqua, and why was it so unique and special to what went on at Cliffeside Park?
Chautauqua was a unique American experience. The United States is the only place that held Chautauquas for many years. There's still a few Chautauquas trying to go make the scene. It's not as popular now as it was at that time. And basically, Chautauquas was a bunch of speakers and entertainers that would get together. And you got to imagine, at this particular time, there wasn't radio, there wasn't TV. A lot of people didn't get out of the area. They stayed in the area. So you'd have scientists that would come in. One of the Chautauquas there at Ashland actually had a scientist that brought in a telescope, which a lot of people had never heard of a telescope. And for free of charge, they'd be able to look at Venus and Mars. Many preachers were there preaching sermons, and they would have dog shows, entertainers. And these Chautauquas, a lot of them lasted 5 to 7 days. And it was a place where people would come from out of town. Did some research, and there were some people that came from Maryland down to an Ashland Chautauqua. Huntington had them, and Ashland had 2 of them. The first ones were at Cliffeside, then eventually at Central Park. And one of the most famous people to ever come to the Chautauqua, at least from what I can tell, is a lady named Fanny Crosby. And she's known as the blind hymn writer. And if you go to any church and you look through some of the old hymns, she's written the majority of them. And we believe that whenever she spoke, that there was 13,000 people there. And there's a picture I've got in the book of the crowd. They couldn't hold it inside the building that they called the Opera House or the casino. They had to hold it outside. And she would tell stories of what was going on in her life when she wrote that particular hymn. And then she had a baritone singer who actually sang the hymns. And then they would take breaks, and some of the pictures in the book during the breaks, You could see them, they had tents, and they would also, and I thought this was kind of fascinating, during those breaks, people at that time, they had two sets of clothes that they would wear. There again, where we wear t-shirts or shorts during the day, they would have suits and dresses. So they had a morning wear and they had evening wear. So that gave them time to change clothes and come back for the second part of the Chautauqua.
That's very interesting. Almost like, it reminded me to hear you explain that, like a huge festival of ideas where you just bring in experts and scholars and people who at that time had the knowledge of that maybe people in the community didn't get to experience to really exchange those ideas, which I think is really neat. There's something else you write about that I found was really interesting, and you start to go into some of this on the Fanny Crosby section and the hymns there. You mention the hymns that was a part of that part of the Chautauqua, but you also talk a little bit about how some of the churches in the area use that opportunity to really engage in teaching during these events during the Chautauqua. And you talk about First Christian Church on Winchester Avenue in Ashland as being one of those, and children were involved. There was biblical themed magic lantern shows. So overall, how prominent were the churches and the pastors and what went on at Cliffeside Park, and is this something that the churches had sort of an opportunity to maintain as long as the park was open and doing well?
Yes, and with the Chautauquas was actually started by Christian ministers. And the main reason was to be able to teach the Bible to different groups of people in different ways. So at all the Chautauquas, no matter where they were located in the United States, there was a large Bible theme. They brought in some, like we said, other entertainment, but most of it was Bible themes. They would even have actors like Abraham Lincoln dressed in his outfit, but it was still biblical themed. And a lot of the board members that were on the Chautauqua group were the local ministers of the area.
Okay, very good. So they had a hand really then in the programming and who was coming and what was going on there.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Now, a park wouldn't be a park without a roller coaster, and I looked for that in your book. I wanted to find out if there was one at Cliffeside Park, and indeed there was. And I love the title of this. It's called Leap the Dips.
Yes.
What a great roller coaster name. It was built in 1909, and it cost around $20,000 when it was built. Tell us a little bit more about this Leap the Dips roller coaster. And I imagine for a park at this time, it had to be sort of a unique attraction as part of what went on at Cliffeside.
Yes, and this particular roller coaster was kind of a unique roller coaster because at the time there were two major designers. One designer had roller coasters that had a lot of humps, a lot of hills and valleys. Another roller coaster company designed a lot of curves. So if you look at some of the early Coney Island roller coasters, they have a starting point and a stopping point, and a lot of them were just dips. So this particular roller coaster had a combination of both, what you would consider a roller coaster today. And the roller coaster, there was a lot of people that were scared to ride the roller coaster. Some of the reports suggest that there was probably more people watching than riding, but the roller coasters at the time were loud, very, very loud. But with the pictures, I believe there's between 8 and 10 pictures in the book. The pictures show that it looks a lot like the modern roller coasters of today. It's a big tourist attraction, especially with the park. They had football, baseball games that were played at the park, but they couldn't play on Sundays. That was a part of the agreement that was in the original deed, so the roller coaster got a lot of use on Sunday afternoons.
In 1903, we start to see some things change at Cliffeside Park, mainly because Camden Interstate Railway Company opens a sister park, or they call it a sister park, of Cliffeside Park, and that is Camden Park. When it opened, how was it similar to and different from Cliffeside Park?
When it first opened, it was more or less just a little picnic ground. Some of the articles in the early Huntington Examiners mentioned that Cliffeside and Camden Park both opened the same day, but nobody's going to go to Camden Park. The entire city of Huntington has been emptied to go to Cliffeside. But eventually, if you look at Cliffeside, it had 50 acres. Camden Park at the time had 27 acres. And Cliffeside had been open a lot longer. But once the Camden Interstate Railway Company got involved and managed both, it didn't take long for Camden Park to open up. And whenever they opened up, they expanded. And the only thing we know, only material my wife and I could find was It just says one day people stopped going to Cliffeside. We believe that Camden Park became the place for Huntington area, and at the same time, people from Ashland started going more to Central Park. So Cliffeside was right in the middle and eventually started dying out.
And I know Camden Park was going through really a pretty aggressive marketing strategy during that time from about 1918 to 1923. The management there at Camden Park really emphasized marketing this park. And it's interesting to see how they get really aggressive with the marketing, as you're saying. The Ashland folks go to a different park, but it's almost like Cliffeside tries to hang on to its reputation as being the catalyst, but it seems like that it wasn't enough, that the marketing that Camden Park was doing at the time really had an impact on what happened.
Yeah, and about 5 years later, Camden Park, they got their first roller coaster, and it was called the New Sensation, and it was a little bit larger than the roller coaster at Cliffeside, so the attractions that brought people to Cliffeside, people could get it at Camden Park. And the company was trying to have both companies up and running, and eventually it just made sense. It was a financial strain for them to have two parks, and they eventually chose to close Cliffeside down.
And I know you talk about this in the book too, that when we get into the 1920s, around this same time that Camden Park was really aggressively marketing their park, American society was undergoing some changes. We had the radio, we transitioned from a World War I economy more towards a peacetime economy. We see movies becoming more prominent. We see cars, people having cars and ability to move a lot faster than maybe they used to. So what happened to Cliffeside Park? You write a little bit about that towards the end of the book, that eventually Cliffeside Park does close in 1923. So what happened in terms of sort of the wind down of Cliffeside Park, and then what happened to Cliffeside Park, the area and the space after the closing?
Whenever they finally started to close, some of the stories mentioned that the Chautauqua meetings that they were having wasn't being fully attended. There were some Chautauqua meetings going on down at the Central Park at the time. And there was a story that I've got in the book that they just said, for some reason, people just stopped going to Cliffeside. Like you mentioned, it was a perfect storm. The park wasn't built for automobiles. If you drive by there now, that's where the Ashland water plant, and there's a couple ball fields there. The Highway 23 was with automobiles, they started expanding. They didn't have any parking. It's right in the middle of two hills. Whereas Camden Park, they could accommodate parking. So eventually it just started dying down, and then a company from Camden Interstate Railway Company, his name was Mr. Neal, he eventually came in there to take the park, to buy the park, and to lot it off into not business, but more residential lots. And I've got some charts in there that we discovered, but the problem was during the 1930s, it sat there for a while, during the 1930s, the Great Depression and the Great Flood happened. And the economy fell, so the Camden Interstate Railway Company just let the park go, and the city ended up buying it. And of all things for the city to do to it, they ended up turning it into a garbage dump, which always kind of bothered me. You can't go through there with a metal detector there unless you can go over there to the top of the hills or something. And eventually the couple restaurants were located there. But it's just fascinating that today, if you go to the area, called Olive Area Park now, they're still playing baseball there. So they've been playing baseball for over 100 years.
That's so neat. That's really fascinating.
And they used to play football there. Yet one of the things that I've put in the book for the readers to look at, some of Marshall's first football games were played at Cliffeside. And it'll be interesting to read about what they were called, because they weren't called the Thundering Herd at the time.
That's exactly right, yes. And we're not going to give that away for the readers. We want the readers to look at that on their own, but that was a very unique feature about your book. So, Dale, you've got this book finished and complete. Are you working on another one? Are you thinking about another one? And if so, are you going to stay with Ashland and Kentucky history, or are you going to branch off and maybe do something else?
I'm going to branch off with a few different directions. There's about 4 or 5 historians in the area that I want to interview, and I'm going to start looking at some events and some people and places in the Ashland, Huntington, Ironton area. And I've got 4 or 5 neat ideas that hopefully in the next year or two I'm going to start putting it together.
Great, fantastic. So, Dale, in our final moments with you, if anyone wants to get into contact with you to talk more about Cliffeside Park or to get a copy of your book, how can they get in contact with you and where can they get a copy of your book?
They can go to the website. It's called cliffesidepark.com. And if you have a PayPal account, you can order it from there. And Empire Books sells the book as well. So you can look at either one of those, and on the website, I'll start updating whenever there's some more stores that'll start carrying it.
Okay, very good, fantastic. Glad to hear that. Dale Queen is the author that's with us here today on Chapters. The title of his newest book, Cliffeside Park, Gem of Nature. A really interesting insight into a park that I certainly didn't know a lot about, and I know many of our readers and many of the folks watching our program today will be interested to learn because it is an important part of our region's history. And thank you so much for doing the book, and thanks so much for coming on Chapters to talk about it.
Thank you for inviting me, Eliot.
And we want to take a moment to say thanks to the staff and management of Empire Books and News for providing our studio taping space today and being our sponsor each and every time we do an episode here on Chapters, so we appreciate their sponsorship so much. We invite you to come down to Empire Books and News, check out their selection of books, no matter what genre it is that you like to read. Also get a copy of Dale Queen's book, but if you're a magazine reader, we encourage you to stop by as well. They have the largest selection of magazines in the tri-state, and that's available to you right here at Empire Books and News at Pullman Square. And if you've got a question, comment, or story suggestion, or you want to reach out to us here on Chapters, we've made that possible to you via email. Our email address is right here at the bottom of the screen. It's lp4@zoominternet.net. So we encourage you to send those comments and that feedback in. We do read all the comments and feedback we receive, so please keep those ideas coming. And if you've missed a previous episode of Chapters and you want to go back and check it out maybe for a second or a third time, we've made that available to you as well through the Armstrong One Wire page on YouTube. All you need to do is go to www.youtube.com/Armstrong One Wire. From there, click on the Chapters tab, and you can go back and see over 55 interviews with authors, publishers, and editors from West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. So if you want to go back and see them again, all the episodes are archived right there for you on the Armstrong One Wire page on YouTube, and we certainly encourage you to do so. And that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters. Please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.